So why don't we settle in and we can get started with our chant. Again, it's really nice to be with everyone, and it's good in this imperfect YouTube world, doing live stream. It's really good to use our imagination and just the sense that there are folks out there that we're, in a very real sense, here together, reflecting on these teachings from our spiritual ancestors. And, they had complicated and busy lives, probably in some ways not so different from ours. And evidently, some of them developed pretty deep wisdom, understanding, compassion in their lives. And then we want to sense being the recipients, the grateful recipients of our spiritual ancestors' wisdom. And that's such a beautiful thing to gather like we're gathering, to take advantage of these pointing out instructions, basically the wisdom of our ancestors, their roadmap for how to be a wise, compassionate, engaged, skillful human being. And one way that we connect ourselves with this lineage is we chant the refuges and precepts, and we'll do it slowly now, repeating them 3 times. And it's just a simple Buddhist code for waking up to the way it is, and that intimacy, that being awake with the conditions of life, the conditions of this moment, allows for more beautiful engagement, fearless engagement, showing up in really useful ways. And that's Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. So let's do the chant, and then we'll sit together until about 8. Buddham saranam gacchami, Dhammam saranam gacchami, Sangham saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami, Dutiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami, Tatiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami, Tatiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami, Tatiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami. And taking our time, we'll settle into the meditation now. And just feeling at home in this sitting posture. Feeling at home, if you can, with whatever feelings emotional qualities that are present now, and making any final adjustments. We take up this ancient form of sitting relatively still, sitting upright in a way that supports alertness and relaxing the mind and body as best we can, giving it permission to be soft, undefended. And in the most simple way, we gather the energies of the heart and mind into the here and now. And many of us, we have used the ordinary rhythm of breathing in and breathing out as a support. It's, of course, relatively easy to notice the sensations of breathing in and the sensations of breathing out. So we use it as a kind of bridge or gateway home to the present moment. Breathing in, coming home. Breathing out, realizing that it's safe to relax, safe to allow things to be the way they are. Breathing in, realizing I am home. This is how it is. Breathing out, allowing, relaxing, letting things be. So actually the meditation object is the present moment, but we conveniently use the simple experience of breathing in, the bodily experience of breathing out, as a way back to the present moment. If we're actually sensing the breathing in and the breathing out, then of course the mind, the heart is present. And when we learn how to sustain that present moment awareness, then the power, the strength, the steadiness begins to increase. We build some momentum with our present moment, wise and kind awareness. So let's take some time to stabilize present moment awareness. Be willing to begin again and again. So we're learning how to be wise and skillful as we attempt to gather the energies of the mind and the heart here and now in the present moment. And we can use ordinary experience like breathing in and breathing out, or the ordinary experience of the sensations of the body sitting, or other aspects of the present moment, and bringing this kind and alert, curious attention. And there's a very distinct flavor of this stabilizing of present moment awareness. The Pali word we use is samadhi. And there's a sense of wholeness. That's really the flavor to look for. So from a scattered, fragmented inner quality to a sense of wholeness or unification, feeling stable and steady. So see what is helpful, how to gather, to sustain this present moment awareness in a way that is psychologically, emotionally healing. And of course, this is a natural process. It doesn't require the mind or the attention becoming tight at all. Just the opposite. Relaxation is an essential ingredient in this stabilizing present moment awareness. Relaxation with an authentic interest or discernment. Oh, this is the way it is now. Whether we're attending to the breath coming and going, or the whole body, or the present moment in the most general sense. Discerning, it's like this now. This is being known. It's like this now. So, of course, what really helps in stabilizing this present moment awareness is a willingness to let go of all of our doings, our worries, our hopes, our fears. That's why using something ordinary like the sensations of breathing in and breathing out, and training the mind to be interested in this relaxed way, it really helps us put down all the other things that the mind might get lost in, all the worries or hopes or planning. because it has another job, which is to connect and sustain attention with the ordinary experience of breathing in and breathing out, or more generally, feeling the whole body sitting, or whatever you might be using as an anchor for this present moment awareness. So there's a basic rhythm, both in terms of an individual sit, but also in terms of our years of practice. Initially, there's really no deepening of wisdom without some stabilizing of present moment awareness. So initially, we emphasize stabilizing present moment awareness, cultivating this sense of wholeness and calm, alertness and relaxation, because this heart is suitable for this deeper learning we call insight, the deepening of understanding. A more scattered or distracted mind really is incapable of learning much, just how it is. And then once we sense that the mind, the heart is stable, calm, whole, not fragmented, some grounding, some continuity of present moment awareness, then in a sense the object of awareness is the heart, the mind, the heart, and the presence or absence of dukkha. How's the heart? We don't make anything happen, we're just, with compassion, we care about how it is now, right here, right in the middle. How's the heart? Squeeze or absolutely no squeeze? And whenever the heart seems to be disturbed or heavy or tight, even in a subtle way, if we cultivate the insight, there is dukkha, there is this tightness, there is this disturbance, this agitation. So whatever it is, we just acknowledge it with or without words. Oh, the heart's like this. This is interesting. This disturbance, this weight, it should be understood. We should be really patient and curious and hands off so it can really be seen for what it is. What is this squeeze, this entanglement, this weight? What is this? Not conceptually, but directly, immediately. And the more we get close to dukkha, the more we experience it as something in motion. It's conditional, it comes and goes. It arises and ceases like everything else. And this deepening of understanding is really liberating ultimately. Understanding, seeing clearly how the heart gets tight and how this tightness ceases. But we're not trying to make dukkha, tension, go away. We're just observing it as a natural phenomena right here in the middle, in the heart. Noticing the heart getting tight. Noticing that that tightness isn't constant. It's something that is changing or unfolding. And we give it permission to do whatever it's going to do. So if you notice any resistance, any struggling, any tightness, bring this patient, kind, curious, wise presence. Is this constant or inconstant? This craving, this tension, this holding, wanting. And again, we're not trying to make anything happen, we're just noticing. Of course, our mind has been entangled in dramas, and most of those dramas, maybe all of them, have eventually ceased. There was a problem in the mind was struggling, caught up, burdened, and then eventually that ceased, that ended. So we're curious about being aware in that moment where that tightness ceases, how it arises, the mind gets caught, how it ceases. Willing to be a sincere student of that process of dukkha arising, dukkha ceasing. So for a few minutes, a few more minutes, just observing the condition of the mind and body here and now, and in particular interested in any subtle or not too subtle struggling, catching the arising and then observing with patience, perhaps catching a moment of it ceasing. So adjust the body if you need to. Make yourselves comfortable. Nice to be with everyone tonight. So hopefully most of you were able to have that conversation either in the small groups that Michelle helped with at the end of last week's class or on your own at home, where you just shared or reflected on your own about the deepening of understanding of being able to directly acknowledge the presence of dukkha. And I think I mentioned last week or maybe the first week that, and this just feels so right on to me, but where the Buddha says that the cause for dukkha, the cause for that uneasiness, whether it's that more subtle, deep uneasiness in our hearts or the more obvious difficulties that we have in life, the cause for suffering is the not understanding of it. And, I repeat that because it's a real motivation. Then there's actually something we can do. We can use our life and our actual experience of dukkha, suffering. We can use it to no longer be ignorant of suffering, to really be curious. But this is a very different relationship. See, our normal relationship with suffering is I want to get rid of it. And totally understandable. And especially if we have conditions that have been particularly difficult and even overwhelming, then of course we want freedom from that dukkha. But wanting to be free of suffering actually isn't the cause for the release, the freedom from suffering. According to the Buddha, according to those of us who've been doing the practice for a while, or you don't even have to be a Buddhist to be learning about dukkha, right? Because it gets our attention whether you've ever bumped into the Buddhist teachings or not. But for people who have been reflective in their lives, what we find is not wanting to suffer doesn't make it go away. What makes it go away is bringing this balanced, stable, clear, kind attention to the present moments of our life, more and more continuously being present. That changes our understanding. We see something about the experience of dukkha, something about the experience of suffering that we hadn't seen before. And it's that waking up. We're waking up more, most importantly, we're waking up to this direct, immediate experience of suffering. And in waking up, seeing what we haven't seen, we find our liberation. We find more and more space, more and more, or I should say less and less in this reactive and unproductive way of relating to the suffering. And that's true both in this sort of inner space of our heart and mind and body, but also in our wider communal circles and the suffering and the injustice and the difficulty in the world around us. There's a lot to learn about how to show up for suffering. But we have to understand, the Buddha didn't start by teaching this deeper practice of observing dukkha ceasing, observing the cause, I should say, observing craving, the cessation of craving. So that's basically the insight. Like when we put language to the insight that the Buddha points to, the Buddhist teachings point to, it's this observing, this intimate observation of craving ceasing. And we're realizing then in that moment the mind or the heart free of craving. And we can, think about that, and we can even imagine that, but we want to directly experience this mind, this heart, free of craving. Because then it dawns on the heart, on the mind, oh, this is a possibility to be in the world, but the mind not caught, not entangled with craving. And it's like a different reality, same reality, just without craving. We know this reality with craving. That's the world we're very familiar with. And this really is moving us now to what in this ancient map of the Four Noble Truths, the second noble truth, which is the truth, the ennobling, liberating truth that there is a cause. Suffering arises. That's kind of how I like to think of it. It's an insight. Oh, suffering is arising. So we're seeing that dukkha is a natural process. And as a natural process, it arises. And we want to see the nature of that arising. What are the supporting conditions that when they're there, then dukkha arises? And what the Buddha's pointing out instruction is, when there's craving, when there's an identification with desire, then the heart gets tight. Then everything gets tight. The mind, body, heart gets tight. But before the Buddha would sort of go into these more powerful and subtle teachings, generally, the way it would work is people would, show up. They see this person, the Buddha is respected, and they're basically, what would we say if we ran into somebody who seems to know what they're talking about? If we're honest, we'd say, hey, I want to be happy. Tell me how to be happy, right? And the Buddha wouldn't lead with his teachings on renunciation because for most of us, most of the time, that wouldn't sound very appealing. So he would say, oh, you want to be happy, you want to have a nice life. Well, learn how to practice generosity, because practicing stinginess is not the way to be happy in life. So in all ways, cultivate generosity and see if it isn't true that things start to work better in your life. You just end up being happier. So this is for us to check out, right? And he would also teach similarly about sila, this ethical conduct, or this deep and resonant commitment to not harming. Well, you want to be happy? You want your life to work better, your relationships to work better, to feel like you belong, to have just sort of ordinary well-being and success in life? Practice generosity and practice this deep and resonant commitment, valuing of non-harming. Get really interested in non-harming and see if it ain't true that life starts to work better for you. So this is generally what the Buddha would start with. If someone who maybe didn't have that many, hadn't had the good fortune to have had a very reflective life, and so therefore, was stingy in different ways and would sort of cause harm if they thought they could get something from it, could justify being mean, could justify cheating on their taxes, or being a little aggressive here or a little passive aggressive there, gossiping, things like that, right? And then somebody who seems to know what they're talking about says, you'd be a lot more happier, you'd feel pretty good in your life if you would just make an art, a really beautiful art of cultivating generosity and this commitment to non-harming. And so people would do that, and they'd, this is, you don't have to believe this, but it'd be nice for us all to check this out. And then over time, oh, you know what? My life is working better. I feel like I belong in my life, belong in my communities more, having cultivated this deep valuing of generosity and non-harming. And then the Buddha at that point might, so now our life is working better. He might sort of invite a pretty provocative reflection at this point, that even though my life is working pretty well, there's still some uneasiness in my heart. And this is not so easy. If we have good fortune and just have nice conditions, it's not like something we want to pay attention to, that even when things are going well, right? Even when I'm being good and things are going relatively well in my life, we're not that interested in noticing that the heart on a subtle level is still discontent, still unsatisfied, still uneasy. So then the Buddha might ask us to clarify that just the drawbacks of sense experience, just the limitations, even when we're comfortable, we're not really satisfied. Initially, it's really nice when we get what we've wanted, but then after a while, it's not so nice anymore. I'm not saying it's bad, but it isn't satisfying in the way that it was in the initial moments when, oh, I have my new car, or I have my new device, or my new pair of pants, or my new this, or my new that. There's a kind of real gratification, but we tend not to notice that sort of it peaks and then it diminishes. And then there's really that joy, that initial joy of gratification. It's pretty ephemeral. It's something that comes and goes. And what do we notice remains? That subtle hunger, that habit of identifying with desire, what in Buddhism we call craving. Tanha is the Pali word, and it's related to the word thirst, thirsting, hunger, right? It's that, it can really blow up and be very obvious, but it is there in the background when it's not obvious, that kind of hungering for solid ground, hungering for complete satisfaction. And have we ever got a complete satisfaction so that we remain totally, completely satisfied? Are you there? I'm not there. And so then that hunger, that thirsting remains. And then when students of the Buddha got clear of that, so their life is working relatively well, they've had the good fortune and the instructions, and not perfect, but they have some basic well-being and that basic sense of belonging. And then they're with that safety, that well-being, if they're fortunate, and they can take this teaching from the Buddha and get curious, they'll notice that even here, there's some unsatisfactoriness, dukkha. There's still dukkha, right? Because as I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, there's the obvious dukkha of mental and physical pain, like I bumped my head the other night. That was dukkha. And then there's the dukkha of change, paranami dukkha. So when things are really nice, beautiful fall evening, hanging out with friends, and we realize it's getting awfully cold as the sun goes down. Oh, it was really nice, but now it's not so nice, and pretty soon we're going to have to go in, right? Okay, so even though it's nice now for the remaining minutes, that niceness is sort of undermined by knowing that I can't count on it. I can't make it last. Like I still feel pretty, my body feels pretty vibrant, but being 62, and noticing how much more stiffness there is in the morning than there used to be, I can see that vibrant health that I feel a lot of the time, I know that I can't count on it. I've seen enough older people, and I'm becoming one of those older people, right? That I know it's not like a refuge, a dependable refuge, the vitality of my physical body. So then it's only then that the Buddha would give these teachings on the Four Noble Truths, which is really this deeper teaching on renunciation. We're letting go, and it's not even so much that you or I are letting go, but we're realizing the letting go of craving, which is the cause of dukkha. So this whole path that's mapped out, and by the way, traditionally the teaching on the Four Noble Truths is thought of as the Buddha's first Dhamma talk, and there's really beautiful stories about how that came to be, that first Dhamma talk. But scholars basically think of that as something that was constructed maybe a century after the time of the Buddha. I mean, clearly it includes the Buddhist teachings, but this map, this formulation, the Buddha mentioned it a few times in the suttas, but the whole story may be something that got constructed later. And during the time of the Buddha, the path that the Buddha talked most often about is, developing samadhi, that stability of present moment awareness, that calm, clear, continuous present moment awareness, in order to see Dhamma. So Buddha, this wakefulness, waking up to Dhamma the way it is, and seeing the inconstant, changing, unsatisfactory nature. That's really the same thing as the Four Noble Truths, just a slightly different formulation. So, we stabilize present moment awareness, and we have this insight, the first of the three insights. Oh, there is dukkha. There is this subtle unsatisfactoriness. Hey, you know what? It's relevant. This is interesting, this dukkha. It should be understood. Ah, I have understood it. These first three that we place under the First Noble Truth, there is dukkha, it should be understood, it has been understood. It's just a way of having a stable and honest relationship to that underlying uneasiness of the heart, even when things are going well. Clearly, there's more obvious experiences of dukkha when things aren't going well. But even when they're going well, there's that uneasiness of the heart, that dissatisfaction. So with that stability and with patience and with curiosity, we continue to observe. And then there arises a deeper insight. Oh, dukkha arises. So whatever that uneasiness is, now there's enough stability, enough concentration, whether in daily life or in a formal sit, where we really see that tightness, that dissatisfaction is related to this activity of tanha, this thirsting, this craving. I really like one of the links, one of the resources for this class that I sent out, the link for is Ajahn Sumedho, this Buddhist monk, Western Buddhist monk, who wrote this booklet on the Four Noble Truths. I think that's what it's called, the Four Noble Truths. It's really quite good. I think it's just 50 pages, and he has a section on each of the Four Noble Truths and the 12 insights in the Four Noble Truths. I recommend it as a good overview, and really not just a beginning text of this practice, but really something to work with throughout your years of practice. But what the way Ajahn Sumedho describes the second noble truth is attachment to desire is craving, right? So this tanha that the Buddha talks about is when, because there's always going to be liking and not liking. That's just part of being a living creature. We like this, we don't like that. There's nothing, it's nature. That's the nature to like and dislike. And then with conditions as they are, the mind that we have, we take that natural desire and we personalize it. We take it personally. We get identified with desire. And we construct stories like, I need to have that. I'll be happy if I get it. I'll be really unhappy if I don't get it. This catastrophizing and this hope and fear. Hope that I'll get it, fear that I won't. Hope that I'll get rid of this, fear that I'll never get rid of this. Hope that I'll become somebody, fear that I won't. And these are the three kinds of craving. The craving for some sense experience, the craving to become somebody, the craving to be done with things, to want it to be done, to be out of here, to be finished. And just different ways of thirsting, having a problem with the way it is. And of course, all of these three, any flavor of craving, involves self-view. This habit, this deep, chronic habit of organizing experience, organizing the meaning that the mind constructs around a sense of a separate self, a separate permanent self. And then that craving, it's really that it's sort of desire on steroids, because when there is that view of self as a separate permanent entity, and then that sense of self sees the desire as me and mine, right? It personalizes the desire, then the whole dukkha response of tightening, of squeezing, of feeling burdened is the natural result. Of course, in the way the Buddha understands things, in the way that you and I can understand things, right, is that dukkha, suffering, has to be a natural process. It isn't personal, actually, and that's what we have to realize. We have to see that awakening is a natural, impersonal process, and this seeming experience of me suffering is also an impersonal and natural process. It's lawful. And what the stability of present moment awareness does is it reveals these two processes of suffering and the release as natural processes. And that's really important with the second noble truth, because otherwise, as we stabilize awareness and have a more honest and intimate understanding of dukkha, the subtle and not so subtle experiences of that squeeze, of that tension, and we continue to stabilize present moment awareness, and we really see, dukkha arises, and we really see that as that experience of craving, that identification with desire, the ego can get in, okay, I'm going to let go of this craving. And we can really veer into this shadow of like trying to become somebody who doesn't crave. And it's like you see this in Buddhist circles a lot. We see it in ourselves, hopefully, if we're being honest in our practice, where we're trying to become somebody who doesn't crave. And we act like we don't care. We act like we don't crave. Oh, yeah, sure, I'll have some ice cream, but I don't need it because I'm a Buddhist and I'm not attached. But if, you've got a lot, sure. If it makes you happy, I'll eat your ice cream. Right? We can have this sort of weird stuff around desire because we're afraid of craving, because we've identified with the Buddhist teachings and we've, been a good intellectual student, and we know we're not supposed to crave. So then we just go immediately to the idea of not craving, instead of what the Buddha suggests is we bring this balanced, kind, stable, continuous present moment awareness. Patience is really so essential at this place of observing craving. Oh, there is craving. There is this cause, so to speak. So basically we're correlating when there's a squeeze in my heart, when there's dukkha, there's craving. There's an arising of craving. And then with that arising of craving, there's the natural result of the squeeze, the tension, the weight, the entanglement. And when that craving ceases, then that weight goes away. And so instead of trying, like me, getting in there and getting rid of the craving, we observe it. We know the craving is there. Oh, there is craving. We're seeing that the craving is not helpful. It's optional. Doesn't need to be there. It's not helping anybody, right? But that's different than wanting or trying to make it go away. We're just observing that the craving arises because of ignorance, right? It's the misunderstanding of desire and constructing a selfing around the desire, personalizing the desire, that there's craving. So we just keep seeing the craving, seeing that it's extra, it's not helping, seeing craving cease. And all things cease. You don't have to make it go away. Craving will cease on its own. So this is our homework this week. Like we did last week, we'll have small groups at the end next week at 8:35 or so. And during those small groups, or those of you who are going to do your small groups at home with friends or your own reflection, but we're really trying to stabilize present moment awareness so we notice those ordinary moments. Oh, there is dukkha. Should be understood. I'm going to really be with this. Stabilize awareness so that we see, oh, there's craving here. There's a cause. This identification with desire. It isn't helpful. It isn't needed. And it ceases. So we want to see, like, well, how does that happen? That arc of like craving arises with ignorance, craving arises with patient observation of craving, wisdom arises, and so there's no longer any ignorance. So without the ignorance as a supporting cause, attachment, identification, craving ceases. And we want to see that whole arc. And now this may seem more complicated than it is, but as you're living your week, then just notice, when there's that squeeze, you're feeling caught up in something, some desire to do something. So it could be, just wanting to eat some dessert or wanting to spend time in the internet in a way that isn't helpful to anybody, waste time on the news or whatever it might be. And then if you can just remember, oh yeah, I'm doing this course, Buddhist Studies course, perfect time to realize, oh yeah, the heart is tight, the heart is caught, right? Is entangled. And then we stabilize awareness, patience, and we see, like you can even prompt, is there any craving? Is there identification with desire? A sense of a me who needs to get something or get rid of something or become somebody, right? And that if only, then I'll be happy, that kind of thing. So we're looking like, is that there? Oh yeah, there it is. Okay. Now don't just go right to trying to get rid of it, because that suppression, repression of desire, of craving, gets in the way of the deepening of understanding. So one thing you can drop in at that moment is, does craving cease on its own? Now, it's not so easy to hang out with craving. It takes a lot of equanimity and confidence in the Buddhist teachings and your own practice. Like, okay, this is that burning of craving. But it's like something is on fire and we feel so compelled to put it out by gratifying the craving, getting what we think we want. But what we really want to do is just hang out there in that experience and see what happens. Because there are so many times we've wanted something or wanted something to end or wanted to become somebody, these different aspects of desire and craving. But that burning of craving ceased without us actually gratifying whatever the craving was about. But that doesn't mean that mindful awareness was there to really see that experience of craving ceasing. And we really want to see that moment when craving is abandoned. And we'll talk about this in the weeks ahead, this third noble truth. Oh, this is the cessation of dukkha. This is the mind, this is the heart, free of dukkha. Oh, absent that burning, that uneasy burning is absent. Oh, so this is a possibility, the heart free of grasping. Now we know this in degrees, and we want to stay humble about whether we've realized the complete cessation of craving. Deep states of absorption, deep states of meditation, meditative concentration. We get the taste because the real definition of a deep state of samadhi, absorption, is craving is skillfully being suppressed. When the mind is really still, and it's in a sense using that quiet, that peace, that stillness as the meditation object, then that mind isn't craving, isn't needing the experience to be different than it is. So really, the flavor, the aftertaste of a deep state of concentration is, oh, I felt really free to not be wanting, to not need things to be other than they are. And so much of our life, so much of our experience of our life is this due to this animating force of craving. So we just have to have a lot of humility. We don't really know who I am, who I'd be without this animating force of craving. On the outside, we may not look that differently, but the internal experience, sometimes if you have a really peaceful sit, there can be a reverberation. That peace and stillness and calm can reverberate for a while afterward. And you'll get a sense of sort of moving through the world, your ordinary world of relationships and food and this and that, but there's still a pretty powerful flavor of contentedness. And you still might, watch a TV show, or eat some food, or, these reflexes of like, oh, there's a candy bar there, I'll have some. But it's a different experience because of the reverberation of contentment and peace. It's like there's no need, there's no sense that candy bar is needed. So you don't have to reject sense experience that comes your way, but there's not that sticky, I'll be happier if I have this, because the mind, the quality of the mind is really dominated by contentedness and peace. And this is one of the advantages of, doing our best to be a good student of calm and settling the heart, calming the mind, cultivating that continuity of mindful awareness, which really, as I mentioned in the guided sit, brings in this gathering, this unification. And that's the beginning of that, getting the taste of the cessation of craving. And that really inspires us in this more wisdom part of the practice, where we're becoming a good student of dukkha and a good student of craving, which allows us to be a good student of the cessation of craving. So I wanted to mention before we ended, I sent out earlier today in the email this 12 insights that is in this sutta, where the Buddha describes the Four Noble Truths. I mentioned one of the earlier weeks, he starts by talking about the middle way between it's not about indulging in sense experience, and it's not about asceticism, rejecting sense experience or being afraid of sense experience, right? It's really the cultivation of these 12 insights. And so if you haven't printed that out, you might want to print out that link I sent out earlier this afternoon, and it's called the 12 Insights in the Four Noble Truths. So each of the Four Noble Truths, there is dukkha, there is a cause, it arises, it does cease, and there's a way of practicing, a way of relating that is liberating. This is the Noble Eightfold Path. So there are 3 insights for each of the Four Noble Truths. And this, we talked about this first one. There is dukkha. It should be understood. It has been understood. There is a cause. Dukkha arises, right? Craving is the cause. It should be abandoned. It has been abandoned. Those are the 3 insights. There is cessation. This cessation should be realized. It has been realized. There is a path. There is a way of relating. This should be developed. It has been developed. There is a liberating way of relating. Oh, thanks for reminding me. Yeah, I had this problem before when I wear these shirts. Thanks, Freda. So anyway, you might want to get a hold of those 12 insights, and that will just help you. So the homework for the small group next week then is to use those next 3 insights. There is an origin of suffering. Craving should be abandoned. Craving has been abandoned. So in just the simple way, we're getting really curious about craving. Craving for just an ordinary sense experience, craving to become somebody, and craving for things to be done. And as I mentioned, it really helps to emphasize the necessary patience here, right? And to make peace with the uneasiness in our hearts, to really get curious about it. And we can do it with those around us too, right? So we don't want to miss any opportunity. That it's not just us, this heart mind, that has craving. the whole world is filled with it. Our cats have it, the dogs have it, squirrels have it, the birds at the bird feeders have it. So we can see this kind of restlessness that is inherent in living beings. And for humans, we have this additional, with a more complicated mind, we have this additional problem of identifying or personalizing this natural movement of desire, right? And that's kind of allows it to become really neurotic. This is from Ajahn Sumedho. And I think this is from that text that I mentioned that I linked to his booklet called The Four Noble Truths. He writes, "Now you are looking at the pain or the anguish you feel, not from the perspective of it's mine, but as a reflection. There is this suffering, this dukkha. It's coming from the reflective position of Buddha seeing Dhamma, wakefulness seeing the way it is." And he goes on, "The insight is simply the acknowledgement that there is this suffering without making it personal. That acknowledgement is an important insight. Just looking at mental anguish or physical pain and seeing it as dukkha rather than as personal misery, just seeing it as dukkha and not reacting to it in a habitual way. Because if the cause of dukkha, the cause of our dissatisfaction, is not seeing, not understanding dukkha, then we have to befriend it. And of course, in a way, that's the hardest thing in the world for us to befriend dukkha. Because all of our egoic habits, or to run from dukkha, or to get to something pleasant, to make the dukkha tolerable, or to want to be done with it, become somebody, like even to become awakened, that we can use the Buddha's teachings and these practices as just another thing to crave. And we have some idea of ourselves as an awakened being, right? Beautiful Dharma being, and we want to become that person. And we might project onto our teachers or on to our spiritual ancestors that they somehow were, whatever. And that may be true, but that projection, it's part of this becoming and, oh, I want to be like that. But is that in the direction of release? Or is that itself just the next moment of craving, wanting to become? This is from Sylvia Borstein, a chapter in her book, It's Easier Than You Think. And she writes, "The first noble truth declares unflinchingly, straight out, that pain is inherent in life itself, just because everything is changing. The second noble truth explains that suffering is what happens when we struggle with whatever our life experience is, rather than accepting and opening to our experience with wise and compassionate response. From this point of view, there's a big difference between pain and suffering. Pain is inevitable. Lives come with pain. Suffering is not inevitable. If suffering is what happens when we struggle with our experience because of our inability to accept it, then suffering is an optional extra. I misunderstood this when I started my practice and believed if I meditated hard enough, I would be finished with all the pain. That turned out to be a big mistake. I was disappointed when I discovered the error and embarrassed that I had been so naive. It's obvious we are not going to finish with pain in this lifetime. The Buddha said, everything dear to us causes pain. And then this is a really, I think, useful last part of this paragraph from Sylvia. Those of us who have chosen relational life have made the choice that pain is worth it. So those of us who are in relationship with other human beings and other creatures, right? Have you noticed that loss hurts? If we allow someone to become a dear one, our cat, our partner, our child, then we've given them permission to break our heart when they act in ways, or when they leave us, or when they die, or when whatever, right? So this is just comes with the territory of being in relationship and caring. So even though, like, avoiding relationship is itself, you know, neurotic, it's like to be a mammal who has all these social instincts and then to decide, well, it's just too painful. So instead, what we're doing is we're using the ordinary, unavoidable pain of relationship, the ordinary pain that comes with life, to study dukkha, study its cause, study its release, study the way of living, the way of relating that leads to this release. And I was reminded, when I was thinking about these first Noble Truths that we're studying now, this interview with Cornel West. Some of you know him. He's a well-known activist and philosopher and scholar and professor at Princeton and Harvard and I think Union Seminary in New York and among other places. And there was some festival or honoring Martin Luther King in Boston a couple years ago, I think 2018, and he was invited, and they interviewed him, or there was like a panel discussion, and this is a translation of that discussion. And in that discussion, he mentioned that near the time when Martin Luther King was shot, that there evidently was a poll, and 72% of Americans and 50% of Black Americans disapproved of Martin Luther King at the time when he was shot. So, he wasn't universally popular like now. He's in some ways a superstar in our culture, but it was more problematic back then because, this is what happens when you speak truth to power. And he was especially, in those later years before he died, was really interested in the not just the work of anti-racism, but also poverty and being anti-war. And this is, in the early years of the Vietnam War, where it wasn't so much a popular uprising against the war. And so there was serious pushback. And Cornel West, he goes on and he said, despair is not a bad thing. He or she who has never despaired has never lived. Anyone who looks at the history of the world and doesn't have some element of despair, something's wrong with you. Despair means you have a sensitivity. But what Martin Luther King hated was when despair had the last word. He comes from a blues people, where catastrophe is always confronting you every minute of your life. Institutional catastrophe and personal catastrophe. But you take that catastrophe and you reshape it with your compassion and with your creativity into a style and a smile. Like B.B. King and Ma Rainey and Bessie Smith and Billie Holiday and Coltrane and Kendrick Lamar. He's a blues man. He's just doing his hip hop thing. You can see him wrestling with catastrophe, but not allowing despair to have the last word. But despair must be heard. It must be heard because that's what it is, because that's what it, I think there's a word missing, what it is to be human. All of us wrestle with catastrophe in that sense. But if all there is gets caught up in the pessimism, then you're paralyzed. then you're debilitated, then you end up being a spectator rather than a participant. And he goes on, it's really beautiful little discourse. And he really talks about how easy it is to get caught in cynicism around dukkha or sentimentalism, like just, oh, it's going to be fine. He had some real critique. I guess Barack Obama around that time or earlier had been in Boston and had mentioned, when it's sort of like, as a politician, on a national level, you have to sort of say something about America's greatness, and I think he quoted President Obama saying something like, America is a magical place. And, America is just America, and we're capable of some really there's some beautiful parts to what America is. And obviously there's some really horrific parts. And who we become as a people, this country, it's really in play, right? And we could become a really not so wholesome place, or possibly we can become a really just and wholesome place. And nothing's guaranteed. And that's really important. That's the same with us individually, right? Because we're natural processes, and it really depends on what we feed. And the dynamic that the Buddha, this essential teaching, when we're ready, this teaching on renunciation, it is the renunciation of craving. And that there's a natural process for that. It's the study of dukkha, the study of craving, until the mind begins to see the cessation of craving and realizing the heart that's free of craving. Because as much as that makes sense intellectually to us now, we really need that experience to build the confidence that there is a way to be engaged in the world without our life being animated by craving, by fear, by desire. Doesn't mean we're going to be without fear and desire, but we'll be without being confused by fear and desire. Oh yeah, it's just fear. It's just desire. We won't be relating to that with identification. Somebody sent a question in last week. And by the way, feel free, if something is unclear, feel free to send an email. I think everyone has my email because I've been sending you the emails every week. And if you just send your question in, and I'll try, if I can, to address it in class next week or the following week. And so a person sent in a question, I'll just read a bit of it. I'm uncovering more and more diluted and unwholesome thoughts and so much fear born from being in this world and heavily seeded by being raised by a mother with significant, less than nurturing practices, mental illness, that has made my adult life a struggle to find a self and a voice in here. I'm finding that my physical discomfort, fear, anxiety become so high that after a while I resort to black and white and very negative judgmental thinking. I'm often catching that thinking now, trying to hold disparate thoughts at the same time, but I notice how much it happens, how physically taxing it is to challenge these thoughts and beliefs. You once told me, when you experience fatigue, make sure you're also bringing attention to the present moment, joys and gratitude. Yeah, and that's so important. Like this at the beginning of our sit tonight, just emphasizing the simple joy of gathering, collecting, unifying in the present moment. And if it's not easy, then ask yourself, well, what can I do? What can I pay attention to? Or what can I do now so that I can gather in the present moment? I can settle with this whole presence, this presence with the whole of what's here and now. Because that's, in a sense, an essential ingredient to see clearly. We have to feel that healing, that safety of being present. And when the pain is too much, then we're going to, it won't feel safe to be using the unpleasantness together. When there's a lot of samadhi, we can actually open to a lot of unpleasantness. But in the beginning, we want either neutral or, even better, some pleasant experience. I mean, the reason why in perfect worlds, when you build a meditation hall, you want it to be a really pleasant place. Even better if it's in a really pleasant environment, like not in the middle of a busy city. You have a peaceful surrounding and an orderly space that just feels good to be in, good feng shui, right? And there's a real art, like if you look at the different Buddhist cultures, or any, just more generally, when you look at spiritual temples, whether it's an Islamic temple or mosque rather, or a synagogue, or a beautiful Christian temple, church, some of those places, they just have really, really pleasant to be in, and the mind settles. Or just being in your favorite place in nature. So when what's sort of showing up is this sort of heavier, more intense stuff, the question is, what can I pay attention to? When I'm where, when I'm doing what, when I'm paying attention to what, is my heart willing to gather in the present moment, willing to settle, willing to be alert and relaxed? Because it's really only then that we can study dukkha, its cause, its release, and the way. And we have to be really, we have to be real about where we are. And like that point I made at the beginning of the talk tonight, where the Buddha would teach about the joy of cultivating generosity and abandoning stinginess, and the joy of cultivating sila, this commitment to non-harming, and how it really strengthens, in just a basic way, the sense of goodness, self-esteem, like I belong here in my life. And so that we can use these teachings, cultivate, and it, of course, what generosity looks like is going to be different in each of our lives. It doesn't mean we start giving away money. It just means we don't believe the thought that I need to be stingy in order to be happy. We look for ways, like with my circumstances, with the conditions of my life, what does a generous heart look like? How can generosity be expressed in my life? Maybe we just touch somebody in an appropriate way, and that's a beautiful, simple act of generosity. Maybe we show up to the people we live with in a different way, so it really feels like we're showing up in a generous way in our conversation with someone. We have to believe, we have to hold out the possibility that it's always possible to be more generous. It's always appropriate to abandon the instinct, the tendency to be stingy. And it sets in motion a sense of well-being. Same with ethical conduct. Not some big burden, oh, I got to be good, I've got to stop cheating, I have to, stop taking advantage of people. But really see it as a privilege, like, oh, there is this way to creating safety and a sense of well-being in my life, just by honoring this value of non-harming. And because of that value of non-harming, willing to refrain. Like when I have an impulse to hit back, to be insulting or demeaning or gossiping, it's like, yeah, I could do that, but I'm really going to sense, I really have this sort of deepening sense that it's to my advantage, like my well-being depends on refraining from acting out in this way. A lot of the commitment to non-harming is learning that we can refrain these more base instincts to hit back, to gossip, to put down, to sort of cut corners, and take a little bit more than we should. It's the somehow thinking that, well, it's a dog eat dog world, I got to take care of myself. And if that means sort of not being fair to other people, not being respectful to other people or other creatures, so be it. But we live with that. And so we really want to uh, get good at these very ordinary ways to build a safety. That safety that comes when we're feeling some inner well-being. Some people might call that self-esteem, emotional, psychological health and well-being. But like everything else, it arises naturally. It's a lawful, impersonal process. There are things that build that sense of well-being, and there are things that take away from that sense of well-being. And we can just check out whether the Buddha knew what he was talking about. Does the cultivation of generosity and non-harming do that for us? Does the cultivation of samadhi, the stability of present moment awareness, contribute to that? Well, the Buddha says absolutely. Certainly aligns with my experience, probably aligns with a lot of your experience. And so we can share that in the small groups next week as well. But the more specific homework is around craving and how to be aware of craving without trying to make it go away. And when we see craving clearly, we see that it's extra, that it's not helping, that it should be abandoned. But we're really waiting for that abandoning to just happen. Craving will cease. And get really curious, even with a sense of humor, like you feel a strong pull to do something. Then just like challenge yourself, okay, will this cease on its own? And then just be patient with it, with a sense of humor, a sense of interest, curiosity. Will this strong craving cease on its own? And then that will be a great topic for conversation in the small groups next week. Send your questions in. Been really nice being with all of you tonight.